She slammed the precinct door so hard the glass rattled in its frame like a warning tremor before an earthquake that could swallow whole blocks and spit out rubble where homes once stood, the sound echoing down the block like a gunshot that nobody could ignore or pretend was just a car backfiring in the distance, or a firecracker from kids celebrating nothing but survival in a neighborhood where joy came rare and guarded. Cutting through the humid August air, thick with exhaust from idling buses belching black smoke that hung low like funeral veils over coffins nobody wanted to open because opening meant acknowledging the bodies inside and the dreams buried with them, and the distant thump of bass from a passing lowrider with rims spinning like helicopter blades under neon streetlights, flickering between red and green in a rhythm that matched the pulse of the city's unrest, and the heartbeat of those who lived in its shadows, counting days between paychecks and sirens. Officer Karen Whitlock, badge 4729, clipped crooked to her Kevlar vest because she never bothered to straighten it after shift change and figured rules were for rookies who still believed in the academy's shiny ideals and polished boots that hadn't yet walked through blood or mud or the gray areas where right blurred into wrong had just shoved 62-year-old Marcus Tate, a black Army veteran with 22 years in uniform and scars that mapped every deployment from Desert Storm, where he lost 2 fingers on his left hand, to a frag grenade that took out his radio operator, 2 leaving him screaming coordinates into a dead mic, while shrapnel whistled like angry hornets seeking flesh to tear, and lives to end the surge, where he lost 3 brothers in a single ambush when their convoy hit a daisy-chain IED on Highway 1 outside Baghdad that flipped 2 Humvees end over end like toys discarded by a giant child and painted the asphalt with American blood that soaked into the sand and never washed out no matter how many rains came or how many convoys followed. Face first onto the hood of his own faded blue 1998 Ford F-150. The paint chipped from decades of Michigan winters. Salted roads that ate metal like acid, leaving pockmarks like bullet holes from wars, fought on home soil too, and rust blooming like cancer along the wheel wells where he'd patched it himself with duct tape and prayer and stubbornness that kept him going through deployments and divorces and deaths. Her knee jammed between his shoulder blades hard enough to crack a rib, she would later deny hearing even when the medical report said otherwise, and the X-ray showed a clean fracture like a snapped twig under boot or a promise broken in the heat of the moment, the pain shooting through his chest. Like the rounds he'd taken before in places where pain was currency and survival the only prize. She screamed at the top of her lungs, veins bulging in her neck like cables under strain about to snap and send everything crashing down in ruins. Face red as the stoplight she ignored while running his plates for no reason other than the color of his skin and the age of his truck, and the way he carried himself with dignity she mistook for defiance. You think you're above the law because you wore the flag once, old man. That don't mean shit in my city. This is Detroit, not your sandbox. You don't get to mouth off to me just cause you got some shiny medal from a war nobody cares about anymore, a war we lost anyway and forgot the lessons from, and the names of the fallen. Marcus's purple heart, pinned crooked to the breast pocket of his denim shirt, faded from too many washes in hard water, that left white streaks like salt lines on skin after sweat or tears or both, clinked against the hot metal as she wrenched his arms behind him and snapped the cuffs too tight. Ratchet clicking like bones breaking or magazines loading into an M4 before a patrol where every round counted and every second decided who went home in a box or on a stretcher. Each notch a promise of pain that radiated up his arms into shoulders that had carried rucks heavier than her ego and many lighter than their dog tags, etched with names that haunted him still. The 15-year-old across the street, Jamal Carter, phone already recording because his mama taught him never trust cops without proof, and his older brother got beat for a broken taillight last year, leaving him with a plate in his jaw that clicked when he ate, and a fear that never left no matter how many smiles he forced, caught every second. The spit flying from Whitlock's mouth landing on Marcus's ear and sliding down his neck like venom from a snake that struck without warning or provocation. The way Marcus's cheeks scraped the paint, leaving a streak of blood mixed with rust that looked Like war paint from a battle he thought he'd left behind in deserts far away but carried in his soul. The casual laugh from the backup officer, who arrived 30 seconds too late to stop it, but right on time to slap Whitlock on the back and say, "Nice stop, rookie. You showed him who runs these streets, who owns this block, who decides who belongs, and who gets profiled." Within 48 hours, that video, raw and unfiltered with no music, overlay just the sound of Marcus breathing through pain like he did under fire, counting breaths to stay alive and conscious, and Whitlock's heavy boots on asphalt grinding glass from previous stops into dust, hit 2 million views. On X, where users dissected every frame pixel by pixel, zooming in on her sneer and the flecks of spit, and the way her eyes held no remorse. Then TikTok, where teenagers stitched reactions, crying real tears, and adding captions like, "This why we kneel. This why we fight. This why we record every interaction." Then every local news station from Detroit to Dallas running it on loop during prime time, with experts debating use of force, while former cops called in to defend her, saying she was just doing her job in a tough neighborhood where stops were routine and resistance was assumed even when it was compliance in disguise. By the end of the week, the entire 47th Precinct on Gratiot Avenue in Detroit, a squat concrete bunker built in 1973, with asbestos in the walls that flaked like dandruff onto uniforms and into lungs, causing cancers years later, and bloodstains in the holding cells no bleach could erase, no matter how many times janitors scrubbed with industrial cleaners that burned their hands and eyes and souls, burned to the ground, not from rioters chanting in the streets, though they came later with signs and fury and bottles and voices hoarse from shouting truths long suppressed, but from the past Marcus Tate never buried and never forgave, a past that rose like smoke from the desert and choked the life out of every lie the department told itself in internal memos and press conferences and closed-door meetings where they toasted to another day without accountability and another body can't malfunction, swept under rugs threadbare from use. They asked him in the holding cell, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry hornets, the kind that used to swarm the latrines in Kuwait, where he learned to piss fast before they stung or dropped true in full gear with one hand while scanning for threats. "You got anything to say for yourself, hero?" The rookie who forgot to kill the camera, Officer Danny Kowalski, fresh out of the academy with acne still on his chin and a mustache that looked drawn on with marker because he thought it made him look tougher than the fear in his eyes that betrayed his youth, leaned against the wall chewing gum. Like this was just another Tuesday pulling drunks off Woodward Avenue, who puked in the back of cruisers and called him names he'd forget by morning or laugh about in the bar with buddies. Marcus looked straight into the lens, eyes steady as the day he earned that Purple Heart, when an ID flipped his Bradley and he crawled out shooting left-handed because his right arm hung useless, shredded by shrapnel that embedded like memories he couldn't extract, and answered slow, each word measured like rounds in a magazine counted before patrol to make sure you had enough for the fight and the aftermath and the long nights after. Tell Whitlock the ghosts from Fallujah just signed her pink slip and stamped it in blood. Tell her they remember her face better than she remembers theirs, or anyone's. Tell her they've been waiting 18 years for this receipt, and the interest has compounded daily with every nightmare and every forgotten name and every brother lost. The rookie laughed until he saw Marcus wasn't blinking, until he saw the vein pulsing in the veteran's temple like a fuse burning down to powder kegs buried deep under sand and time and unresolved grief, until he realized the gum in his mouth tasted like fear, and the room felt colder than desert night when the temperature dropped sudden, and the stars looked close enough to touch, but offered no warmth. He spoke those words at 19:47 on August 12, 2025, according to the timestamp burned into the bottom corner of the footage in white block letters that nobody could scrub no matter how many IT guys tried with software and sweat and curses and reboots. By 1952, the clip was on X, geotagged to the precinct's front steps where cigarette butts and broken glass collected in the corners like offerings to bad decisions and broken promises, and the gods of indifference who turned blind eyes. Trending under #Fallujah ghosts within the hour as veterans from Fort Bragg to camp, Pendleton reposted with their own stories of being called boy by MP in uniform on bases that flew the same flag they saluted with pride and pain. Replies poured in faster than the servers could handle. Veterans tagging brothers lost to suicide with photos of folded flags presented at funerals with honors that felt hollow and insufficient. Mothers tagging sons deployed to Niger with prayers in captions that ended with a "men and fire" emoji and pleas for safe return home. Strangers in countries Marcus had never visited, quoting his line like scripture in languages he didn't speak, but understood in his bones, because pain translates universal across borders and battlefields and time zones and generations. They watched it first in Atlanta at 1955, where a barber named Leroy paused mid-clippers to show his client a lawyer who nodded slow and said, "This changes everything in court and in conscience and in the way we see power." Then London at 00:55, where a nurse on break in the ICU refreshed Twitter and gasped loud enough for the charge nurse to come running with a crash cart, thinking cardiac arrest in the hallway from stress. Then Manchester at 01:00, where factory workers on night shift crowded around one phone in the break room, ignoring the foreman yelling about quotas and overtime and the cost of living rising. Then Chicago at 19:02, where a Southside grandmother called her pastor mid-sermon and held the phone up so the whole congregation heard Marcus's voice cut through hymns and amens like a blade sharp with truth. Then Karachi at 05:05 the next morning, where a university student named Ollie woke his roommates because this felt bigger than any lecture on international relations or proxy wars or history books written by winners who erase the losers. Then Sydney at 09:47, where construction workers on a skyscraper site passed the phone hand to hand 30 stories up while the foreman pretended not to notice and wiped a tear he blamed on wind or dust or allergies. Every phone pinged like incoming mortars in the night, falling random. Every screen glowed blue in the dark like tracer rounds at night, guiding fire or marking targets or illuminating faces. In a call center in Lahore, a night shift worker named Ayesha paused mid-script about credit card protection to forward the link to her brother in the army, who replied with a single emoji. Fire followed by a fist and then a heart beating strong. In a pub in Glasgow, the bartender muted the Rangers Celtic match so the whole room could hear Marcus's voice crackle through tinny speakers. Pints forgotten mid-sip. One old vet in the corner saluting with tears streaming into his beard like rain on a window or blood from a wound reopened after years. He sat in interrogation room 3, wrists raw and bleeding where the cuffs had bitten deep enough to scar like the shrapnel in his thigh that ached before storms and after lies and during quiet moments. The same room where they once questioned a 15-year-old for stealing diapers to feed his baby sister while his mom worked double shifts at the factory breathing fumes, when Captain Leonard Reynolds walked in trying to play good cop with a styrofoam cup of coffee gone cold and floating skin on top like pond scum from the ancient machine in the hall that gurgled like it was dying or protesting the brew it produced. "Mr. Tate, let's be reasonable here. We can make this traffic stop disappear if you just sign this form and agree." It was a simple misunderstanding between professionals who both served their country in different ways, on different fronts, with different uniforms. Reynolds slid the paper across the table like it was a get out of jail free card printed on cheap copier stock that smudged under sweaty fingers and curled at the edges from humidity and neglect. Marcus didn't touch it, didn't even glance down, just stared at the captain's wedding ring, glinting under the light like a lie, polished daily with excuses and denials. "Traffic stop," he said, voice low, every syllable deliberate, like he was calling in coordinates for artillery over static radio, with lives on the line and no room for error or hesitation. "You mean the one where your officer called me boy 3 times in 30 seconds, like I'm still picking cotton in 1008, 165, or kneeling in chains on plantations? Said my taillight was suspiciously clean for a black man in this neighborhood, like clean is a crime or evidence of guilt or something. Fear in a man who keeps his vehicle maintained, then slammed my face into my own truck hard enough to crack the headlight and leave my blood on the fender drying brown like desert dust under a sun that never sets on memory or injustice. That traffic stop where she laughed while I bled and her back up high fived her like it was sport or quote a met. Reynolds swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing like a fishing cork in choppy water about to go under, or a man drowning in his own words and complicity. She's new to the beat, still learning the streets, still got that academy polish that wears off quick in the real world of calls and chaos. Marcus leaned forward, chains rattling against the table bolt welded crooked by some union guy in a hurry or drunk on overtime and indifference. She's 34 years old, Captain. Old enough to vote for the presidents she claims to protect and serve with loyalty blind. Old enough to drink the beer she brags about after shift in the locker room with the boys' club. Old enough to know the difference between a broken taillight and a broken man who carried soldiers out of fire on his back through sand and blood and loss. Old enough to know better. Young enough to think she won't pay for it. In this life or the next, or the headlines that follow, tell me, how many new officers you got out there profiling grandfathers on Livern, who fought for the same flag you salute every morning with your hand over your heart, but your eyes on your pension and your promotion and your corner office. With a view of the problem, they released him at 22, 14 with a citation for failure to signal. Written in handwriting so sloppy, it looked drunk on power and privilege, and an apology that tasted like ash and stale donuts left out since morning roll call, when someone brought Krispy Kreme, but nobody shared with civilians or suspects or anyone who didn't wear the badge like armor. Marcus walked out the front doors into a swarm of cameras and microphones, thrust like bayonets in a charge he'd seen in training films from another era of protests. Flashbulbs popping like incoming fire from a tree line he once knew too well in Anbar province, where shadows hid snipers and death waited patient. He looked dead center at the nearest lens, the one from Channel 7 with the reporter named Keisha, who kept calling him sir with respect in her voice and questions in her eyes that searched for truth beyond soundbites, and said only, check the Army Times 2007, page 14. Read it slow. Read it with cameras rolling and mics hot and hearts open. Read it out loud in your newsrooms and your living rooms and your classrooms and your courtrooms. Then ask yourselves why a man who saved American lives gets treated like enemy combative on his own soil. Why his service ends at the border, but his trauma follows him home in nightmares and VA waiting rooms and traffic stops that turn violent. Then he climbed into his truck, engine coughing to life with a sound like an old soldier clearing his throat after too many cigarettes and not enough sleep or peace or recognition, and drove home to the house on Livernois where the porch light had burned since his wife Evelyn died in 2019 from breast cancer. The VA was too slow to catch because appointments took 6 months, and pain pills came faster than answers or scans or hope. Chief Officer Whitlock laughed about it in roll call the next morning at 07:30 sharp, boots up on the table kicking over someone's lunch of cold McDonald's fries that scattered like confetti at a bad party or evidence at a crime scene mishandled, telling the room full of half-awake cops rubbing sleep from eyes and checking fantasy scores on phones hidden under clipboards or behind backs to avoid sergeants. Old man thought his medals made him special, thought he could talk back to me because he got a participation trophy from Uncle Sam for playing soldier in the desert where they all looked the same anyway under helmets and dust and fear. I showed him Detroit don't care about no war stories from 20 years ago when gas was $2 and nobody had iPhones to record everything or call for help or expose. Her partner, Officer Miguel Delgado, forced a chuckle that died in his throat like a bad joke at a funeral for someone you barely knew but felt guilty about not mourning properly, then stepped into the hallway and texted his wife Maria, who worked nights at Henry Ford Hospital stitching gunshot wounds that looked like Marcus's scars, old and new and preventable. Something feels wrong about this one, babe. Like we just poked a bear that's been sleeping on grenades, and the pin just pulled itself with our own hands and ignorance. Whitlock kept talking, voice rising over the scrape of chairs and the clink of coffee mugs chipped from years of use and abuse. Betty's crying to the NAACP right now, calling Reverend Al, begging for a GoFundMe to fix his precious truck and buy new metals from eBay or pawn shops or lies. Let him cry. I'll write him another ticket tomorrow. Maybe for breathing while black or existing, while veteran or driving, while old or looking at me wrong. The sergeant pretended not to hear, stared at his clipboard like it held the secrets of the universe, or at least the duty roster, and who got overtime, and who got the easy beats away from trouble. They didn't know the Army Times article Marcus referenced had already been screenshot, enhanced to 4K clarity by some kid in his mom's basement with too much time and too much rage and skills from online tutorials and YouTube, and posted by a user handle at TruthDigger87 in Birmingham, UK at 03:12 local time when the pubs were closing, and the insomniacs ruled the internet with VPN and vengeance and anonymous tips that cut deeper than knives or bullets. The headline read in bold caps across the top, screaming digital like a battle cry over loudspeakers in the fog. Sergeant Marcus Tate saves squad, kills insurgent leader in hand-to-hand combat after RPG ambush, claims half platoon in bloody siege that lasted hours under relentless fire. The grainy photo showed a younger Marcus, 20 years leaner with muscle earned from ruck marches, not gym mirrors and protein shakes advertised on late night TV with promises of strength fleeting. Eyes like flint under a helmet cracked by shrapnel that still sat on his mantle at home next to Evelyn's urn, and a photo of them on their wedding day smiling like the future was bright and endless. Blood streaking his cheek from a cut that needed 12 stitches and left a scar he traced when thinking about what he'd lost and what he'd gained in pain and purpose, holding a severed radio that once belonged to a man named Ahmed al-Rashid, the insurgent commander whose death ended a 3-day siege on a Marine outpost outside Fallujah, where 23 Americans died before Tate's squad arrived on foot through hellfire and dust storms that blinded and choked and tested. The caption quoted Tate from the original interview conducted in a MASH tent with Roman fours in his arm and morphine dulling the edges but not the memory. I did what I had to do so my brothers could go home to their mamas. I'd do it again. Every damn time. No regrets. Just memories that don't fade. He, Ahmed's younger brother, Khalid al-Rashid, saw the post in a hookah cafe on Warren Avenue in Dearborn, Michigan at 04:05 local time when the Apple tobacco smoke hung thick as Baghdad dust, and the TV played Al Jazeera on mute, showing footage of another war in another place with similar faces, and cycles steam curled from his mint tea in lazy spirals that reminded him of mortar trails arcing over rooftops where children played until they didn't and families fled. His phone buzzed so hard it nearly slid off the marble table and shattered like his world did in 2007, when the letter came from the Red Cross with finality stamped official. Khalid had fled Iraq in 2008 after his village burned to ash by airstrikes called in by someone who never saw the faces or the aftermath or the orphans left. Landed in Jordan with nothing but a backpack and rage that kept him warm through winters without heat or home. Then Toronto, where he learned English from CBC and hockey fights and poutine that stuck to ribs like comfort rare. Then crossed the border into Michigan in 2010 with a student visa and a new name, Kyle Rashid, the all-American IT guy who wore Lions jerseys on Fridays and smiled at potlucks with casseroles and small talk. He became a U.S. citizen in 2016 on the same day. His application for asylum was denied because paperwork said he was a security risk despite perfect grades and no record and contributions quiet. Aced his CompTIA certs at a community college in Livonia, where professors called him brilliant and quiet and a quick study with potential, and by 2019 worked as an IT contractor for the Detroit Police Department. Same 47th Precinct, same server room where the body cam footage lived before officers accidentally deleted it at 3 a.m. With bleary eyes and guilty consciences and captains looking the other way for plausible deniability and union protection, thick. They met for the first time that afternoon when Kyle walked into the precinct lobby at 14:22 with a lanyard that read contractor in bold letters and a USB drive the size of a matchbox tucked in his palm like a grenade pin he'd been carrying for years without pulling until the moment ripened. Routine firmware update for the evidence servers, he told the desk sergeant who was scrolling Facebook instead of watching the door or the monitors showing empty cells and overflowing inboxes of complaints and tips ignored, who waved him through without a second glance or a badge scan or even a hello because contractors were invisible until they weren't and systems failed. Kyle's pulse stayed at 62 beats per minute, the same as when he used to run miles through Fallujah rubble-dodging sniper fire that pinged off walls like deadly hail and left holes in concrete and lives and futures shattered. He'd practiced this moment in his head for 17 years, every night since the Red Cross letter arrived saying Ahmed was KIA by American hands in combat close. Every morning since he learned the name Marcus Tate from declassified files leaked on WikiLeaks and cross-referenced with news archives and obituaries and connections. She Whitlock clocked in at 18:00 sharp, still bragging in the locker room to anyone who'd listen or pretend to out of fear or hierarchy, slamming her locker so hard the mirror cracked and spider-webbed her reflection into a dozen angry Karens staring back with eyes that didn't recognize. Bet that vet's crying to the NAACP right now, probably got Jesse Jackson on speed dial, maybe even Obama's people calling for my head on a platter served cold with sides. Good luck with that in Detroit where we got real crime to fight and quotas to meet. Delgado changed the subject to fantasy football, asked if anyone had Cooper Kupp on their roster, or if they were riding the Chiefs train again despite the drama and the losses and the scandals. Nobody laughed with her this time. The room smelled like tension and cheap coffee, and the faint metallic tang of fear nobody named but everyone felt in their gut like a punch incoming or a fall from grace. Kyle sat in the server room, door locked with a paperclip because the electronic lock had been broken for months, and budgets went to overtime, not maintenance or security or upgrades that mattered, fingers flying across 3 keyboards at once. Code scrolling like green rain in the Matrix. Watched in Toronto on bootleg DVD with friends who understood exile and revenge. At 18:47, every monitor in the precinct. Troll call whiteboard that still had last week's assignments scrawled in dry. Erase fading like promises. Bullpen desktops running Windows 7 because upgrades cost money and crashes were tradition like hazing rookies. Dispatch consoles blinking with ignored calls from domestics and dealers and desperate voices, even the break. Room TV tuned to ESPN showing preseason Lions highlights with pundits predicting playoffs like they did every year with hope eternal. Lit up with body cam footage Whitlock thought she had deleted at 03:14 that morning while chugging Red Bull and cursing under her breath about veterans and their attitudes and entitlement and stories. Her slamming Marcus's head into the truck 3 times for emphasis like she was tenderizing meat for a barbecue she'd never invite him to or acknowledge, her spitting the N-word so hard. Flex hit the lens and blurred the frame for half a second like censorship or shame fleeting. Her laughing as backup arrived and high-fived her like it was a game. Winning touchdown in overtime at Ford Field with the crowd roaring approval blind. Then the screens cut without warning to Fallujah, November 14, 2007. Helmet. Cam footage Marcus never knew existed because the Army classified it red until a FOIA request in 2018 pried it loose with persistence and lawyers. A burning Humvee flipped on its side leaking fuel that ignited in whoosh. Flame orange and hungry. RPG smoke black as grief and twice as thick choking the air and vision and hope. A 26-year-old embedded journalist named Karen Bailey. Maiden name, blonde hair matted with blood and sand and tears and mascara running like accusations. Screaming for help as insurgent. Closed in shouting in Arabic Kyle, knew by heart from childhood, lullabies, turned war cries by occupation, and loss and cycles. Marcus Tate, sergeant stripes soaked red with his own blood from a gut wound he never mentioned in interviews or to therapists or anyone, dragged her 40 yards through gunfire that stitched the ground like sewing machine needles gone mad with rage and precision deadly, took a round in the thigh that shattered his femur into splinters he still felt in winter and rain and quiet, kept pulling with one arm while firing his M4 with the other until a Bradley rolled up and laid down suppressive fire that turned the tide and saved the day and her life and others. She lived to file her story for CNN with perfect hair and a Pulitzer nomination and a career boost that opened doors. He earned the Purple Heart and a limp when it rains and nightmares when it doesn't and silence when asked about it by reporters or family or himself. She never thanked him in person. She forgot his face the day the network flew her home first class with a bottle of champagne and a book deal that paid for college and forgetting. They froze in the bullpen like statues in a war museum, posed mid-battle with expressions of shock and recognition and regret dawning. Delgado's coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered into 1,000 pieces that nobody bothered to sweep, because who had time with history replaying in high definition and sound? Captain Reynolds turned the color of printer paper left in the sun, too long fading to yellow with age and exposure. A rookie whispered, "Holy shit, that's her. That's Whitlock in the ditch begging like a child lost." Loud enough for the whole room to hear and regret forever in therapy or resignations. Another rookie started filming on his phone because this was going viral too, and career insurance or unemployment depending on the fallout and the investigation and the union. She screamed first, voice cracking the air like a whip across bare skin or a rifle shot in a canyon echoing endless. "Who the hell is doing this? Shut it down. Shut it the fuck down right now or I'll shoot the goddamn screens myself and every computer in this building until it stops and I get control back." Nobody moved. The footage looped. Karen Bailey's screams from 2007 mixed with Marcus Tate's calm voice from the holding cell. Ghosts from Fallujah don't stay dead when you keep feeding them fresh meat with badges and immunity and ignorance and power unchecked. He, Marcus, walked in at 1903, no cuffs, no escort, holding a federal warrant folded neat in his breast pocket next to his heart where it belonged like a talisman or proof, signed by a judge in D.C., who owed him a favor from Walter Reed physical therapy sessions, where they both learned to walk again on parallel bars with grit and pain and shared stories of survival. He looked straight at Kyle in the server room window, eyes locking across 20 feet of chaos and smoke, already starting to curl from vents like signals or omens, and said loud enough for microphones to catch in history to record in footnotes and documentaries and lessons. Khalid al-Rashid, you're under arrest for felony cyber intrusion, 18 U.S.C. 1030, conspiracy to distribute classified materials, violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, tampering with evidence, hacking city systems, unauthorized access, and whatever else the U.S. attorney wants to throw at you before breakfast or indictment or trial or sentencing. Kyle stood up slowly, hands raised, smiling like a man who just cashed a winning lottery ticket worth more than money, worth justice served cold after 18 years of waiting and planning. "I'm just the messenger, Sergeant. Your message delivered express, signature required, return receipt requested, non-refundable, undeniable." They cuffed Kyle with his own zip ties, standard police issue, black and unforgiving like the system itself when it turns on its own with teeth, and marched him past the bullpen, where officers parted like the Red Sea for Moses with a warrant and righteousness and fear in their eyes. The damage looped on every screen, volume rising with each cycle, until the speakers crackled and distorted like bad radio in a sandstorm, cutting through static and lies and excuses. Whitlock lunged at Marcus through the crowd, nails raking air inches from his face, drawing blood from her own palm where she clenched too hard on nothing but rage and denial. "You set this up, you son of a bitch. You planned this whole thing with your veteran buddies and your sob stories and your Purple Heart pity party and your hacker friends from overseas." Marcus didn't flinch, didn't step back, stood like he did under fire with rounds snapping past and exploding nearby, shaking the ground. I just remembered your face, Karen. Fallujah, ditch on Route Michigan, November 14, 2007, 14:22 local time, exactly when the sun was high and the bullets hotter and the sand stuck to blood like glue. You begged me not to leave you. Don't let them take me, Sergeant, please. I have a daughter back home. Her name is Emily. She's 6. She needs me. I'll do anything. Just save me. I should have walked away and let the desert have you like it had, my friends in pieces, scattered and screaming. She spat at him again, harder this time, with everything she had left in her soul depleted. Spittle hit his cheek and slid down like a tear. He refused to shed for her or anyone who didn't earn it with humility. He wiped it off with the same calm he used to wipe insurgent blood off his cob bar in 2007, after close quarters where it was him or them, and survival instinct, then flicked it to the floor where it mixed with Delgado's coffee and someone's vomit from earlier nausea and the dust of 1,000 shifts and sins accumulated. That's the second time you've marked me today, Marcus said, voice even as a horizon without end or interruption. First, with your knee on my spine, cracking bone like promises empty. Now with your mouth on my skin, spreading hate like virus contagious. Both leave scars. One you see in the mirror every morning shattering. One you don't until it's too late and the mirror cracks under pressure. They try to shut the system down. Power buttons mashed until plastic cracked and fingers bled from force and desperation frantic. Breakers flipped in the basement where rats scattered like conspirators in light harsh. The big red switch in the janitor closet that hadn't worked since 2018 when budget got cut again for new tasers and body cams that failed, conveniently. Kyle had looped the feed through the precinct's own backup generators, humming in the alley like angry bees ready to swarm and sting. The city's traffic cam grid that watched every intersection for revenue and control and tickets, and a satellite uplink nobody knew existed because some contractor installed it in 2003 for Homeland Security and forgot to bill or document or secure properly. Power cut, screen stayed on, glowing like altars to every sin the department ever committed in the name of order and quotas and qualified immunity absolute. He, Captain Reynolds, grabbed the PA mic at 19:27 and ordered evacuation, voice shaking like a recruit on his first live fire exercise who just realized bullets don't care about rank or tenure or excuses prepared. All personnel, code black, exit now. This is not a drill. Repeat, not a drill. Get out while you can before it's too late and the wall's close. Too late. The first brick came through the east window at 19:29, thrown by 17-year old Deshaun Brooks, who grew up 2 doors down from Marcus and learned to read on the veteran's front porch using comic books about Captain America and justice for all who believed in ideals. Then another brick from a kid named Malik, who lost his dad to a stray bullet in 2017 during a drive, by meant for someone else who looked similar in the dark and confusion. Then a bottle with a flaming rag that shattered against the evidence cage and set decades of paperwork ablaze. Confessions coerced under duress and lights, DNA mishandled and labs understaffed, guns tagged and bagged but never tested for ballistics or truth. Glass exploded inward like shrapnel from an IED buried shallow and waiting. Smoke billowed black and angry, tasting of burning plastic and old lies, and the chemical smell of justice igniting without permit or warning. Whitlock ran to the armory, punched in the code wrong twice because her hands shook like withdrawal from power and adrenaline crashing. Finally got the door open on 4729, her badge number that now felt like a curse or a brand seared, grabbed a Remington 870 shotgun from the rack still smelling of oil and previous threats and unused rounds gathering dust, pumped it once for emphasis rack, clack that echoed like Judgment Day final, screaming, I'll kill that bastard myself. This ends tonight with his brains on the wall and my name cleared in blood or fire. Delgado tackled her from behind in the hallway outside the sergeant's offices where promotions were posted, and dreams died quiet deaths unspoken. You already did enough, Karen. You did enough to burn this place down twice and still have fuel left for hell and damnation and reckoning. They fought like animals, fists connecting with cheekbones that cracked like dry branches in wind strong, elbows to ribs that bruised purple and deep like metals of shame worn hidden, curses in English and Spanish and pure rage that had no language but violence and survival raw. Blood smeared the tile in abstract patterns like crime scene photos or modern art in galleries pretentious. Her lip split open like overripe fruit, bursting in the sun too long exposed. His nose cracked with a sound like ice, breaking on the Detroit River in March, when the thaw comes sudden, and floods follow inevitable. Sirens wailed outside, but every unit in the city was responding to 911 calls about the precinct itself. Officers trapped inside screaming for backup over radios crackling with panic. Civilians gathering in hundreds, then thousands with phones and fury and signs hand-painted, fire spreading faster than training could contain, or hoses could reach from trucks, delayed in traffic and chaos and history. He, Marcus, stood on the front steps, live on every network from CNN to Al Jazeera to RT, because controversy sells ads and ratings and clicks endless, smoke curling behind him like a halo for the damned or a crown for the righteous, depending on your perspective and bias and lived experience. A reporter from Fox 2 Detroit shoved a mic in his face, hair perfect despite the chaos and heat and ash in the air like fallout nuclear. Sir, what do you want people to know right now as this building burns and your past consumes it whole like fire? Marcus looked past her to the cameras, to the millions watching on phones and TV and laptops in bedrooms and bars and boardrooms and bunkers. This ain't about me getting roughed up over a taillight that worked fine yesterday when I drove to the store for milk and bread. This is about every veteran your department forgot the day we took off the uniform and became civilians again with bills and PTSD and no parade or thanks. Every black man you profiled because his skin fit your suspect description in a lineup of one solitary. Every lie you protected with a badge and a smile and a deleted file stamped accident or error or oversight deliberate. The past don't stay buried when you keep digging it up with your boots on our necks, your knees on our spines, and your hands in our pockets, searching for nothing but control. They poured in then, veterans in wheelchairs rolling over broken glass with tires that left blood trails like war paths from Normandy to now and beyond into future. Mothers with signs reading "My son served TOO" and "Justice for Marcus" in marker that ran in the heat and sweat and tears of anger. Teenagers with phones held high live, streaming to millions on Instagram and Facebook and platforms. Nobody over 30 understood, but everyone under 20 ruled with thumbs and truth and filters optional. The fire started in the evidence room, accelerant unknown. Some said diesel from the generator shed siphoned by kids who knew better and pipelines of resentment deep. Some said justice poured from a higher power with perfect aim and timing divine and inevitable. Flames licked the ceiling tiles yellow with age and nicotine from decades of smokers breaking rules in secret. 8 decades of case files, including cold cases nobody solved because witnesses feared retaliation or moved away or disappeared into statistics, melted the American flag hanging in lobby until the stars dripped like wax candles at a vigil for the lost and forgotten, and the stripes ran red like blood from a fresh wound that wouldn't clot or heal. She Whitlock broke free from Delgado, who lay bleeding on the floor, clutching his side where a rib poked wrong and sharp like accusation. Shotgun raised like a talisman against truth or a cross against vampires of conscience. Found Marcus in the chaos near the burning dispatch desk where operators had abandoned headsets mid, all leaving domestics on hold and suicides waiting in limbo eternal. You ruined my life, you piece of shit. 20 years on the force, my pension, my reputation, my everything, gone because of you and your desert bullshit, and your hacked fairy tales, and your revenge plot elaborate. Marcus looked at her over the flames, eyes reflecting orange like the desert sun at dusk, when the sand turned blood and the shadows grew long with regret and remembrance. You ruined yours the day you forgot who carried you out of hell, Karen. You forgot my name the minute the chopper lifted off the LZ with you safe and sound, but the desert remembers every face. It remembers yours screaming for mercy you didn't deserve or earn or reciprocate. It remembers mine, bleeding for strangers including you who never looked back or thanked. It don't forget. It don't forgive. It collects with interest compounded. He Delgado grabbed the shotgun barrel from the floor where it fell clattering like bones in a grave, skin blistering on hot metal that smelled like gunpowder and regret and choices made in split seconds that last lifetimes eternal, wrestled it away with strength born from adrenaline and shame and ache. Wife who'd leave if he didn't stand for something real and lasting. The barrel discharged into the ceiling. Boom. Plaster rained like snow in August or ash from a volcano erupting long dormant and angry, dusting everyone in white like ghosts already judged and found wanting in scales. Whitlock screamed and kept screaming, a sound that started human and ended like something from the void between stars or the silence, after an explosion when ears ring and world spins. They dragged her out the back exit as the roof collapsed with a roar that shook the block and sent pigeons fleeing into the night like souls escaping judgment or messages to the divine unanswered or ignored. She screamed until her voice gave out, raw as the night in Fallujah when she thought she'd die, and promised God everything if he'd just let her see her daughter again. Promises she broke the day she put on the badge, and power corrupted absolutely without check or balance. He, Kyle, sat in the back of a squad car, still smiling, reciting his Miranda rights like poetry to the stunned officer guarding him, who kept checking his phone for updates from wives and commanders and the union rep panicking in offices. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Beautiful, isn't it? The system eating itself from the inside, bite by bite, line by line, deletion by deletion, truth by truth. They watched the precinct burn from across the street, live, streamed to 80 million devices and counting, the counter ticking up like a stock market crash in reverse or a revolution in real time with commentators speechless and anchors stumbling over words. London at 0100, where Big Ben chimed over silent crowds holding phones aloft like torches in the dark guiding. Manchester at 0105, where students filled the streets chanting Tate's name in accents thick with passion and solidarity. Atlanta at 2010, where church groups prayed in circles holding hands and Bibles and hope. Chicago at 2015, where protests formed on Michigan Avenue, blocking buses and commerce and flow of daily life. Karachi at 0515, where dawn call to prayer mixed with phone notifications like harmony and chaos and faith renewed. Sydney at 10:20, where office workers watched instead of working and bosses pretended not to notice the revolution on screens and in hearts beating. Hashtags multiplied like viruses in a pandemic without vaccine or cure or end. #Fallujah House, #ghosts, don't lie, #47th burns, #justice for Tate, #remember the desert, #badge or burden, #knee on neck. No more, #past testifies, #reckoning now. She Whitlock was suspended pending investigation at 22:44 by a deputy chief who hadn't slept in 2 days and whose own son was deployed to Syria, counting days on a calendar marked. By 23:03, the FBI took over the scene, yellow tape, flapping in the heat like surrender flags or crime scene, ribbons stretched thin over lies exposed. By midnight, the governor called the National Guard. Humvees rolling down Gratiot like it was 1967, all over again with tanks and tear gas and history repeating in cycles. Soldiers younger than the war they studied in textbooks carrying M4. They hoped never to fire on citizens or brothers in arms. He Marcus stood in the glow, smoke curling around his medals like incense for the fallen or signals to the living that the reckoning had come full circle and complete. A reporter from BBC asked through static and flames and coughing fits choking, "What happens now, Mr. Tate, as your past destroys this present and rewrites the future in fire and ash?" Marcus answered, voice steady as a sniper's breath before the shot that ends it all clean, Now the past testifies. And the past don't lie. It don't blink. It don't bargain. It don't take pleas. It just collects what's owed, with interest compounded daily since 2007 and every day after without fail. They indicted Whitlock on federal civil rights charges 3 days later, 18 U.S.C. 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, maximum 7 years, plus state charges for assault with intent to maim, false imprisonment, evidence tampering, official misconduct, perjury in reports and statements and oaths. Kyle took a plea for 5 years in exchange for testimony about Precinct cybersecurity. Holes nobody wanted to admit existed. Holes big enough to drive a tank through or leak every secret ever whispered in interrogation, or deleted in panic, or buried in servers deep. Delgado quit the force the same week, took a job at the VA processing disability claims for veterans who reminded him of Marcus every day in their eyes and limps and stories untold. Said he couldn't wear the uniform anymore without smelling smoke and hearing screams in roll call or dreams that woke him sweating and questioning. Captain Reynolds retired with a pension and nightmares that woke him gasping at 03:14 every morning, the exact time Whitlock deleted her body cam while he pretended to sleep in his office with the door locked and conscience unlocked and screaming silent. She never wore the badge again. Spent 6 months in Wayne County awaiting trial in a jumpsuit 2 sizes too big that swallowed her frame like guilt swallowing pride. Lost 30 pounds until her uniform hung like a ghost in evidence lockup waiting for auction or incineration or forgetting. Wrote letters to her mother in Toledo that came back returned to sender in red ink like blood from a fresh cut or rejection final. Pleaded guilty in the end to avoid a jury of Marcus's peers who showed up in wheelchairs and dress blues with medals and memories and eyes that judged without mercy. Got 4 years in Alderson FBC, minimum security, teaching yoga to inmates who didn't know her name and didn't care about her tears, or her excuses, or her fall from grace to grass mode. He opened a community center on the site where the precinct once stood, poured the foundation himself on the 1-year anniversary with help from veterans who showed up with mixers and muscle and stories of their own that needed telling and hearing and healing. He named it Fallujah House, though the city fought the name for months in council meetings until public pressure won and petitions overflowed with signatures from near and far. Veterans eat free on Fridays, meatloaf like the mess hall served with extra gravy, and no questions asked, or judgments passed, or forms filled. Kids learn coding on the same servers Kyle once hacked, now wiped clean and running Linux with open source dreams and firewalls thick as armor-plated. The burn scar in the concrete stays uncovered, a black starburst where the evidence room collapsed like a house of cards in wind strong. A reminder that some fires cleanse and some truths cauterize wounds that never healed proper or fully. They still talk about it in precincts across the country, whisper her name like a curse in roll calls from Miami to Minneapolis to Missoula, to Mobile to Monterey, and beyond into infinity. New recruits watch the body. Cam loop in training now, mandatory 30-minute session with a counselor on stand. By and tissues on the table and warnings about triggers and trauma and consequences. Some cry during the Fallujah footage when Karen screams for her life like anyone would in terror. Some quit before graduation with resignation letters citing moral injury and conscience and fear of becoming. Some harden in ways that scare their instructors who see Whitlock in their eyes and future headlines waiting patient. He visits the burn scar every August 12, lays a Purple Heart replica on the ground next to a bottle of Maker's Mark he buys only once a year from the same liquor store with the same clerk who nods knowing. Pours a splash of bourbon for the brothers who never came home. Jamal, who took the sniper round in Ramadi, saving a private who wrote him letters never sent but kept. Tyrone, who stepped on the ID in Helm, and shielding a medic who became a doctor, saving others in turn. Little Mike, who came home but hanged himself in his garage because the VA waitlist was eternal, and the pain was immediate and unrelenting without end, says, rest easy, the debt is paid in full, interest included, compound, forever, men at ease. They tried to bury the story with press releases typed in Comic Sans by interns and blue ribbon panels stacked with yes men and a new chief who promised reform on day one with a smile for the cameras and a handshake for the mayor and empty words echoing. The story buried them under lawsuits that drained the pension fund dry like a vampire in sunlight burning, settlements that bankrupted the insurance carrier overnight with clauses invoked and fines heavy, and a mayor who lost re-election by 20 points to a candidate who campaigned on the ashes. With a slogan, "Remember the fire, rebuild with truth, never forget the names." If you're watching this in London where the tube runs late and minds run later into the night with thoughts deep, Manchester where the rain never stops but hope sometimes does in puddles reflecting streetlights dim, Atlanta where the peaches ripen sweet and the pain ripens bitter under the skin, like secrets hidden, Chicago where the wind cuts deep and the knives cut deeper in alleys dark and desperate, Karachi where the call to prayer wakes the faithful and the notifications wake the restless with news good and bad and urgent, Sydney where the harbor sparkles at dawn like false promises, reflected in water calm, Tokyo where salarymen bow to strangers but not to truth in meetings or mirrors cracked, Sao Paulo where samba never sleeps and neither does injustice in favelas climbing hills steep, Cape Town where Table Mountain watches everything and forgets nothing carved in stone. Eternal and unyielding, share it, tag your local station, ask them why a 62-year-old veteran had to watch a building burn to get justice long denied and delayed. Ask them whose past is next to rise from ashes phoenix. Ask them what ghosts sleep under their own floors, waiting for the right spark, the right knee, the right lie to wake them hungry and vengeful. He closed the center doors at dusk on the second anniversary, locked them with the same brass key the Army gave him in 2007 for a footlocker that no longer exists, but whose contents live in his nightmares and his strength, and his resolve unbreakable as steel. The key still fits, always will, turns smooth as forgiveness he never gives to those who don't earn it with actions and atonement. She sits in a halfway house in Youngstown, Ohio, writing letters no one answers on stationery provided by the state in neat stacks fading yellow, counting days on a wall she doesn't own with a pencil stolen from group therapy where they make her say sorry to a circle of strangers who don't believe her or care or forgive. Her daughter visits once a month, driving 6 hours through snow and regret and silence thick. Brings pictures of grandkids Whitlock will never hold because trust burned with the precinct and ashes don't hug or forgive or warm. They rebuilt the precinct 2 miles away on Mack Avenue in a strip mall that used to sell cell phones and dreams of connection, now broken and obsolete. Smaller, quieter, bulletproof glass 3 inches thick that distorts faces into monsters or truths unflinching. No flag in the lobby, just a plaque that reads accountability starts here in letters already peeling from humidity and neglect and disbelief. Nobody believes it. Nobody stops to read or reflect or change or act. He still drives that same blue pickup 280,000 miles and counting. Odometer stuck but heart still turning over every morning with reliability earned. Taillights work fine. Brighter now with LED bulbs, he installed himself with hands that remember triggers and tools and tenderness. He checks them every Sunday after church where the pastor preaches forgiveness, but Marcus nods at justice and retribution balanced on scales, runs his hand over the dent where his face met metal, smiles at the scar that caught the light like a badge earned in battle and peace hard won. They say on quiet nights you can hear the echo of Whitlock's scream in the wind off Livernois, riding the same breeze that carries barbecue smoke from Mr. Ribs where ribs fall off the bone tender and kids laughing on newly paved courts, funded by settlement money that built hoops and hope and futures bright. Some say it's just the city breathing, exhaling 20 years of pain in one long sigh that rustles leaves and moves on to tomorrow. Some say it's Karen Bailey screaming in the ditch all over again, begging for a mercy she never gave to anyone else in uniform or out or in between. He smiles when he hears it. Always will. The desert taught him patience and time, and the weight of memory that never lightens but strengthens like forged steel. She never will again. The desert taught her nothing but sand in her mouth, and the taste of regret, eternal and bitter.